Hello, you are listening to the Sky News Daily with me, Sophy Ridge, and today we're talking about the person who could be the first ever female chancellor. Now that is Rachel Reeves. She delivered her first keynote speech of the campaign. It took place at Rolls-Royce factory in Derby. Now, Sky's deputy political editor, Sam Coates, was there. He's rushed back to speak to me about Rachel Reeves. I am so interested about all of this, Sam. And part of the reason that I find Rachel Reeves so fascinating is because it feels to me as though, in many ways, she's the ideological driving force behind this potential next government. She is such a force in Keir Starmer's Labour Party.
That's right. I would love to see the conversations between Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. I would love to observe up close the power dynamic between those two, because we are back to having a duopoly at the top of a political party. Perhaps not since Blair and Brown have you got two people who clearly work very closely together. And this sense that I think permeates the Labour Party, certainly permeates the shadow cabinet, that when Rachel Reeves wants to pull in a particular direction, she gets her way, and that Keir Starmer as a leader relies on her political instincts, her economic instincts, and her instincts as another human being. They're a funny couple, but they're one that we're just going to have to get used to.
Yeah, I totally agree. I agree with everything you said there. My sense as well, I get it when I interview members of the shadow cabinet, because if I ever say, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to spend money on that? Are you going to do X, Y, Z? They're like, oh no, Rachel Reeves wouldn't be happy with that. Or, she wouldn't sign that off. I'm like, hang on a minute. They're talking about Rachel Reeves here. She is, as you say, she is a force in the duopoly, as you talked about there. Right, let's talk about the speech, shall we? So what was it that she was hoping to do today?
I'm going to lift the lid on just a sort of campaign secret. Right, political speeches are funny beasts. Often they're used by senior politicians to make announcements, to set the agenda. But in a campaign, the job of a speech is slightly different. Labour announced with a certain degree of pomp that this was Rachel Reeves' first speech. And it was essentially a sort of rerunning of the campaigning lines that we have heard in a manner designed to draw attention to what they think is their biggest win of the campaign so far, which is 120 business figures writing a letter to the Times backing Labour's growth plans. And there was Rachel Reeves standing in this Rolls-Royce testing centre in front of massive turbines, declaring Labour the party of business, in order to draw that contrast with the Labour Party of 2019 and before, when Jeremy Corbyn, who was not exactly business friendly, was doing
What, really?
the job.
Are you saying that, Sam? Sure.
I think even Jeremy Corbyn would call himself worker friendly. When asked today, Rachel Reeves said that she was pro-business and pro-worker, which either keeps everybody or nobody happy. But so much about Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves' Labour Party is about pointing out to people that this is a totally different Labour Party from the one that came before. They wanted to use this as a moment. Was there content in the speech? Not really anything beyond the kind of campaigning lines that we saw. Was it designed to have impact, to draw attention to something? Yes, that's what it was about.
It feels like we should talk about the speech. We should throw to the speech, and you can hear a little bit about what Rachel Reeves had to say. After that, we are going to be playing Sam's interview with Rachel Reeves, which I have to say there are some really interesting nuggets in that interview. But first up, this is Rachel Reeves trying to persuade voters that Labour is pro-business, coming off the back of that open letter that Sam was talking about, listing 120 business leaders who are backing Labour.
Across the world of business, Labour is being recognised as the natural partner of business, the party of growth and the party of enterprise. A few years ago, you might not have expected to have heard these things from the Labour Party. Think how far we have come under Keir's leadership in 4 short years. If we can change this party to bring it back in the service of working people, if we can return it to the centre ground of politics, if we can bring business back to Labour, then I know that we can bring business back to Britain.
So they have it. Rachel Reeves, they're giving her pitch to be the next Chancellor of the UK and the first ever female Chancellor that Britain has had. Sam, let's talk a little bit about the list, shall we? Because it's not without controversy. 120 business leaders, a lot of previous business leaders, not all the kind of current FTSE 100 chief execs. And also our colleague Ian King has been looking into some of the names on that list as well, hasn't he?
That's right. Look, this list has been a massive project for the Labour Party. I think it has taken months of engagement by Rachel Reeves herself and members of the Shadow Cabinet to bring business leaders on side. So I think it's fair enough to ask the question, are the names particularly stellar? There are no FTSE 100 current kind of top bosses on it in the way that there have been in the past, if I'm being honest, if you go back to kind of 97, 2001 for the Labour Party. And quite a lot of the individuals on the list are former executives or not doing the job that they're most famous for at the moment. And some of the names are slightly business adjacent. I'm thinking of Jimmy Wales, the kind of Wikipedia found a good name, but it's not a business kind of growth driving name, that I think. And then there is a question about whether or not there are some companies that are dormant, which Ian King has been talking about, and whether or not Labour might be just making a few adjustments, and we'll see how that develops. But I think it's fair to say that there aren't going to be members of the public with their slide rule going, oh God, it's only the number 4 here. I think there are a spread of impressive household names sufficient that it broadly speaking looks like it's job done. And the question for the Tories is, can they produce a list of their own?
Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, the task that Rachel Reeves has ahead, because it feels like it's a dual task in some ways. It feels like she's got to sort out, to be frank, Labour's historic reputation about not being the party for business, about not being someone who you can trust to spend money wisely, and also to prove that she is the woman who can sort out an awful lot of problems in the kind of balance sheets going forward. Because look, we don't need to tell you what the debt levels are currently. They are very, very high. Public spending is being squeezed. Taxes at historic highs as well. So I'm interested to hear, before we listen to your interview, Sam, a bit about what you wanted to find out from Rachel Reeves today.
As you, Sophie, yourself has previously identified, the challenge for the next Labour government, if we get a Labour government, is visible from space. There is no money left. And the next Labour government have got an unenviable choice, if they get elected, between continuing with spending squeezes on public services or maybe borrowing more, in which case you'll be breaking the incredibly tight fiscal rules that they've just set that are borrowed from the Tories, or raise more taxes. And when I had 6 minutes, because that's what you get, with Rachel Reeves today, most of the time I spent looking at the tax rises question, because in the end, I struggle a bit to imagine a Labour government won't want to put a bit more, and I'm talking about a bit more on top of what they've already talked about, which is fairly small beer, into public services. I'm conscious that there are all sorts of things kind of going pop all over the public sector. Think of prisons, think of local councils that might suddenly need more money. There are huge compensation schemes that haven't yet been accounted for in a budget. All of these things are going to suddenly land in Labour's lap if they get elected as problems that need cash. Where's that cash coming from? So I wanted to rattle around the subject of what exactly they have and haven't ruled out when it comes to tax.
Right, let's listen, shall we?
Now, at the event here in Derbyshire, you just said there are no additional tax rises needed beyond the ones that are set out. How long does that promise last for?
Well, our manifesto sets out what we would like to do in the next Labour government. And all of our promises, the 40,000 additional appointments a week in the NHS, the 6,500 additional teachers in our schools, all of those are fully costed and fully funded. They don't require any further increases in taxes.
Hang on, no, you said that there will be no additional tax rises needed. How long is that blanket promise not to do tax rises beyond what you've already set out going to last for?
Well, I'm not going to write a budget here, but we've been really clear.
Hang on, were you not right? You said...
Sam, there is nothing in our plans that require any further increases in taxes. I have confidence in that. Voters can have confidence.
So what I thought was really interesting there is Rachel Reeves wants the campaign message to be that she is not going to put up your taxes. But when you were pressing her on that point about what would happen, if she has a look under the bonnet of the car, if you like, and finds that the engine's broken, what would she do then? What did you make of her answer?
So you have to listen really, really carefully, because you can come away from a superficial listen to a Rachel Reeves interview thinking that taxes aren't going to go up in the next Parliament. And she says that, yes, there are a few things that they've promised, specific things like VAT on private schools, some carried interest, some sort of changes to tax evasion and non-doms that are slightly different to the Tories, that will generate some cash and that go into public services. And you might come away from the conversation thinking that means that there are going to be no more tax rises in their plans. But it's a slightly sleight of hand of the use of the phrase in their plans or under their current plans that I think betrays a slightly more flexibility in what they're doing. If you say, are you going to raise taxes? She says, well, we've said a few areas. That's all we're planning for. If you then say, but what if it's a lot worse when you get in? And the reason I'm asking that question is because Labour are well aware that money's running out in local councils, in the prison system, all these big compensation schemes. They could end up with a big black hole that they suddenly need to fill. The question that doesn't get asked enough is, what are you going to do to fill the black hole? At which point, she gives a really interesting answer. She rules out rises in 3 types of tax: income tax, national insurance, and corporation tax. But then you go, but if there's a big black hole, what about the other tax rises? And Sophie, she replies, as you just heard, I'm not going to write my budget now. She doesn't deny that. So there is wiggle room to my ear of what they can do. And there has to be, because they need to find money. They need to know that there are ways of getting cash in a hurry to stabilise the government in the eyes of the market if they have to do big spending on things like these compensation schemes, in order to get investing, in order that at the end of the 4.5 years of the first Labour term, they can say, we improve things. All of these things need to be done at pace. And the plans as they stand for more growth, which is going to take time to generate tax revenue, coupled with the kind of limits on borrowing, don't give much scope in other areas. And I just felt in that interview, you could see where the wiggle room to raise taxes more clearly than I've noticed before. But it's but even there, they don't want to risk making it crystal clear.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. To my ear, I think that's potentially further than we've seen her go before in leaving that space. And like you say, she's not saying, oh, yeah, I'm going to put up taxes. Of course I am. No probs. She's saying she's not ruling out other tax rises at that critical fiscal statement, which, as you say, look, it makes sense. Come on. Like, they claim that they, can't write a budget now, but we all know the economic situation. We know this. We know how difficult things are. We know the state of public services. And it makes sense to me that if they were going to put up taxes, specific taxes, short-term taxes, whatever it is, then they've got to do that at their moment of power, which is after they've just been elected.
We learned something new today. Rachel Reeves ruled out a really, really, really quick budget. So the general election's on July the 4th. She kept being asked by the journalists in the room, are you going to have a summer budget, in a couple of weeks after? And she said, I have always been clear, we need the Office for Budget Responsibility to do a proper job forecasting how much money I've got, and that takes 10 weeks. In other words, the very, very earliest that you could have a budget is, I think I calculated, maybe I got it wrong, but it's about September the 12th. But what actually Labour is doing is it's giving itself some time to go through the books, look for the horrors, throw their hands up in the air and go, crikey, I never realised it was going to be so bad. But that's when the conversation about taxes, which of course get raised in budgets, because that's what they're for, comes into play.
Right. Let's take a quick break there, shall we? We're going to be back in just a moment where we're going to be digging a bit more into who the Shadow Chancellor, the potential next Chancellor, really is. Right, welcome back. We are talking about Rachel Reeves. We're talking about the woman who is asking you to put your confidence into her managing the economy after the election. Critical figure in a potential Labour government, as we were discussing in the first half of this podcast. Sam, we're going to talk a bit more about what she would be like as a Chancellor if she gets the job.
It's really hard to tell. She actually puts up quite a lot of defensive barriers. So I'm not going to pretend to you, Sophie, that I feel like I know how she works intimately, because she's not the type of person to let you in. She's very friendly when you meet her. She is very, very professional. And I was watching her up on stage today, and I think you get this from other members of the Labour Shadow Cabinet, you got the sort of sense of fierceness, particularly as she was taking questions from the media. Look, her backstory is well known. She is a Lewisham born and bred, so southeast Londoner at heart. As a Lewisham resident, I always amused to see people from our part of the world do incredibly well. And she was the daughter of teachers. I think the biggest bit of her childhood biography was winning chess prizes, which I think is kind of metaphor that will follow her, that she likes and will follow her all the way around, because it speaks to her ordered mind, discipline and strategy that she would like to associate with herself. If that's the way her chancellorship, if she becomes chancellor, goes, she will use that chess analogy, I suspect, all the way through her career. But she entered the Labour Party when Ed Miliband was becoming leader. She served in his shadow cabinet, but unlike Keir Starmer, she sat out the Jeremy Corbyn years, which is a really interesting difference with the leader.
So I find that really interesting. I want to talk to you about that a bit more as well. I think she's really interesting, actually. I mean, I don't know about you, Sam. I feel like I've got to know her a bit over the years. I've been in the lobby for about 10 years now, and she's certainly someone who I've got to know a bit in that time. It seems to me like she's the girl at your school who works really hard, right? She revises for her SATs, she revises for her GCSEs. Her parents are teachers. It's quite a normal upbringing in some ways, but she's an academic at school, right? She's the girl in the chess team. And it's so different from the kind of Boris Johnson, David Cameron type of politician that we have. I remember when she was called kind of boring, snoring, Rachel Reeves. But I feel like that's because she is not charismatic in the way that we have learned to expect from other political leaders, particularly ones who went to private school, if I'm being completely honest. She's the kind of girl in your class who is going to get A stars all the time because she does the most homework and she is on the chess team and she's super bright. And I find that quite an interesting insight into her personality. What do you think? Do you agree with me, or do you think I'm barking up the wrong tree here?
No, I think that's completely right. I think there's two sides to that. When we look at Gordon Brown, we look at somebody who undoubtedly worked harder than anybody else through his political career, did all the homework, dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. But that didn't quite work for him, because politics is a combination of hard work and instinct. And I think the question will be, does she have both? Mm-hmm. Now, I think she's answered the question, does she have the right vibe to be chancellor, pretty damn well, if I'm being honest. She looks serious. She looks the part. That's not easy. Annalisa Dodds, who briefly preceded her in Labour's shadow cabinet as shadow chancellor, I'm not sure was ever going to get there, but she has the gravitas. But I'm going to bring up one incident that her team will hate, which is...
I hope they're not listening. Sorry if you are, by the way. Sam loves you, really.
Of course they are. I love you all, but I love all politicians.
Everyone equally.
Everybody equally, for balance. Is the fact that bits of the book that she wrote could be traced back to Wikipedia. Now, I bring that up, not even because it's that surprising, but because I was told her reaction to that was she was pretty horrified when she found out. And I think because that ran counter to her reputation, her public reputation, she really hated it. She almost retreated a little bit, one person said, at that, because we didn't quite see as much of her in the immediate aftermath of that story. And I think she puts on this very fierce front. But I wonder, because government, if they get there, is so much harder work than opposition, whether people can needle her or whether she stands firm.
The other thing that I'm keen to pick up on is when you mentioned that she didn't serve under Jeremy Corbyn, because I find this quite fascinating, right? Because many people will say, look, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, they're very similar as politicians. That's why they get on. That's why they are a duopoly, as you put it. But I think that is quite a key difference between the two of them, because Keir Starmer, yes, he's now kicked Jeremy Corbyn effectively out of the party. He's broken away from him. He says he's changed the Labour Party. He did serve under Jeremy Corbyn, and he was in the shadow cabinet was trying to elect Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. Rachel Reeves did not. It feels like that's quite a big personality difference.
It is. And it's a massive difference between the two. If I'm being quite honest, I don't know what the lesson is that we draw from it. I know it's interesting. I could come up with something trite, but she felt very personally, I think, offended by the consequences of Jeremy Corbyn's time as Labour leader, particularly for her Jewish friends in the Labour Party. I think she did not approve of what the Labour Party became in that period and made a conscious, active choice not to serve because she thought that was wrong. It's a different vibe from Keir Starmer, who does shapeshift a little or a lot if you're coming to it from the sort of left-wing perspective. The question I can't answer, and the reason I'm equivocate, is is it good having different types of people at the top, or could we end up with them kind of rubbing up against each other?
It's going to be really interesting because, of course, that relationship, the Prime Minister-Chancellor relationship, if they get there, it's a pressured relationship like no other, I think we should say. It's a tough marriage, that one. It's a hard marriage. Sam, thank you so much. It's been fascinating to talk to you. Well, that is it for this edition of The Daily. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I thought that was really interesting. We're going to be back again here tomorrow. Also, if you do want to listen to the rest of Sam's interview with Rachel Reeves, we're just going to put it on the end of this podcast, so just keep listening.
Rachel Reeves, you've made it clear today that Labour isn't going to match the Tory pensioner tax promise, spending from a roughly similar pot to the money that you're going to put towards the NHS and breakfast clubs. This is your political choice. But would you mind explaining to the post-World War II pensioner generation, who are hurt by rising prices, just why they should get less under a future Labour government than under a future Tory one?
Well, I want taxes on working people and pensioners to be lower. But to be able to do that, you've got to explain where the money is going to come from. And yesterday, the Conservatives were using this pot of money to create a national service. Today, they're saying they're going to use this money to cut taxes. The truth is, the Tory sums just don't add up. They've had 14 years to crack down on tax avoidance. They haven't done that. I don't think people can have any confidence in these desperate gimmicks that they're putting out now.
But you could be putting more money towards pensioners. You're choosing not to. You're putting it into the NHS and breakfast clubs. Why not? What should pensioners make of that?
Well, it's under the Conservatives that pensioners are paying more in tax. When the Conservatives came to office in 2010, around 5 million pensioners were paying income tax. Today, that number is around 8.5 million. So it's under the Conservatives that more pensioners have been dragged into paying taxes. Now, we want taxes to be lower on pensioners and working people, but I will never play fast and loose with the public finances in the way that Liz Truss did. And it looks now that Rishi Sunak is singing from that same songbook in making unfunded commitments. So far in this campaign, even before today, £64 billion of unfunded tax cuts from the Conservatives. This is pretty desperate, and no one can believe a word they're saying.
But there isn't there raw electoral politics here. The Tories are pumping money towards pensioners because pensioners are more likely to vote for the Tories. You're not, because they don't.
I think people, including pensioners, can see what's happening here. The Conservatives are desperately adding more baubles to a Christmas tree. But the truth is, unless you can be really clear about where the money's going to come from, then these sums just don't add up, and therefore they're not deliverable. And that's the question people have to ask at this election. Do they want another 5 years of chaos and decline under the Conservatives, or a changed Labour Party offering stability? And frankly, after what we've had these last few years, stability is change.
Now, at the event here in Derbyshire, you just said that there are no additional tax rises needed beyond the ones that are set out. How long does that promise last for?
Well, our manifesto sets out what we would like to do in the next Labour government. And all of our promises, the 40,000 additional appointments a week in the NHS, the 6,500 additional teachers in our schools, All of those are fully costed and fully funded. They don't require any further increases in taxes.
Hang on, no, you said that there will be no additional tax rises needed. How long is that blanket promise not to do tax rises beyond what you've already set out going to last for?
Well, I'm not going to write a budget here, but we've been really clear.
Hang on, were you not right? You said...
Sam, there is nothing in our plans that require any further increases in taxes. I have confidence in that.
Hang on,
Voters
but there's nothing in your plans, but you say there will be no additional tax rises. There's a difference between those two. One allows for there to be more tax rises, one doesn't. Which is it? Because you said that there will be no additional tax rises barely an hour ago.
Well, we have no plans for increased taxes, and indeed we said at the weekend that for the duration of the next Parliament there'll be no increases in income tax and national insurance. I would like those taxes to be lower, but I'm not going to make any unfunded commitments to cut taxes without being able to say where the money's going to come from.
So did you misspeak on tax policy in the last hour? I mean, could you end up increasing VAT in any way at all in the next Parliament?
Well, we've already said on VAT, for example, Sam, that VAT will apply to private school fees. So we've already made that commitment.
And that is one of the commitments that you've made. But your statement an hour ago was that there would be no additional tax rises. Could there be rises to VAT beyond that in the next Parliament? Can you rule that out?
We don't need to increase VAT.
Can you rule it out?
We don't need to increase VAT.
Well, then will you rule it out?
Sam, we don't need to increase any taxes because all of our plans, unlike the Conservatives, are fully costed and fully funded. And people can have confidence in that there will be nothing that we put forward that we can't explain where the money's going to come from. And we've put out the limited tax increases that a Labour government will introduce. And people could be confident that we will not be going further than that. The commitments around business rates and VAT on private school fees, the commitment to crack down on tax avoidance and ensure non-DOMs pay their fair share of tax, the tax on private equity bonuses so that is fair, and an extension of the windfall tax. That is the sum total of the tax increases that we are putting forward, and that is the sum total of what is needed to fund the commitments that we have made.
But everybody's expecting you to get into power if you win the election, declare that there's a much bigger black hole than you're expected because of the Tory mess, and then suddenly you will have plans to put up other taxes other than the ones that you've specifically ruled out. Can you rule out anything around VAT? Are there other tax rises that you think might have to run? Your plans might change.
There are no further increases in tax that we are planning or that we need to fill any black holes.
So are you ruling that out for the whole Parliament?
Well, we've already ruled out increases in income tax, national insurance and corporation tax. That's further...
But not the others. That's the point. You sound like you're not going to raise... So there could be raises in other taxes other than those three.
I'm not going to write a budget here, but I've been very clear about the tax changes that are needed to fund the plans that we've put forward. And voters can be certain, unlike with the Conservatives, who are putting out £64 billion worth of unfunded tax cuts, that there's nothing in my plans that's not fully costed and fully funded. And that is the difference now between the Labour Party that will put stability first and a Conservative Party that is desperately throwing around huge cheques without any idea how they're going to pay for them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.